the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of 81 All Out Podcast. It's been a while since we did our memory series. Usually we do that ahead of an important test series, which is going to come up, the Australia Tour of India. So in light of that, I thought we would like to turn the clock back and go back to 2004 when Australia visited India, which was a memorable series for many reasons, not least for the fact that Australia won a series in India after 35 years, if I'm not wrong, the final frontier. So to talk about that, not just from a cricketing perspective, but also, how some of us saw that series, how we remember that series, and when we look back at it, what is it that strikes us about the way we were consuming cricket at that time and so on. That's the point of the series. So to kind of go back and revisit it, I've got a couple of guests, one guest with me and one, of course, my fellow, the primary host, Sidvi, who chose not to host today. I don't know why. So I've got Sidvi with me, and I've also got a new guest, a debutant at 81 All Out, Prashant DP with us, who's an entrepreneur based out of Chennai, but more importantly, played third division cricket in Chennai, which is very unusual because whenever I run into division cricketers in Chennai, they always upgrade themselves by a couple. So I would like to believe that he played first division, although he refuses to admit that. Welcome, Prashant. Thanks for joining us, and welcome, Sidvi, of course.
Hey, thanks so much, Mahesh. Pleasure to be here. And I didn't play too many games, nor did I do too well in the third division. So I played a lot more fourth division, but I played a few games in the third.
Come on. Nobody can check it. You can add some jazz.
Yeah. You should be talking about, leaving the division aside and just dropping some names of the cricketers who you played against and all that.
No,
So
come on.
that is the usual. Thanks, Prashant, for joining. I know.
It's our pleasure.
You've been one of our loyal listeners for a long time, and lovely to get your feedback about our work.
That's my pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
All right. So the way we typically do it is to get some sense of what you were doing at that time, and how are you following that series. Give us a little bit of your life stage and sort of personal memories from that series to start with. I know a little bit about Sidvi, but I'm still going to ask because not many people know that it was also his debut as a cricket reporter, at least covering a series. So Sidvi, why don't you get started? How was tell us what you were doing at that stage in life. How did you get into Cricinfo at that time, and how did this turn out to be your first series?
Yeah, so I joined Cricinfo around October 2003. This was pretty much after I finished my engineering college, and I was basically a confused guy who was lucky enough to find a way in Cricinfo, thanks to a series of circumstances that started with me randomly bombarding them with cricket articles and ended with Sambit Bal, the then editor and also the now editor, reading those articles and then contacting me, and then one led to another and actually giving me a job. So it was that itself was quite surreal for me because I'd never imagined a full-time job in cricket writing until then. Like for someone like me, I thought you had to go through a certain other path to get there. And I didn't realize that people who had this background like I did, engineering background, would even be considered. So yeah, that was one thing. And then after that, when I started working there, I was mainly covering domestic cricket. I used to travel around, I was based in Mumbai, so I used to watch a lot of domestic cricket in Mumbai, but also occasionally travel around and watch some final, Duleep Trophy final I watched in Mohali. There was a Ranji Trophy final that I watched in Chennai, the Mumbai versus Tamil Nadu final. And so it was going basically 2003 till the middle of 2004, I was doing that. But this series came around towards the end of 2004, right? Like October 2004. And Australia basically landed in Mumbai. They made that their base for a few days. And then they played a tour match there against the Mumbai Ranji team at CCI, and which I covered. And that was a great game to cover as well. It's always fun to cover these warm-up games. And CCI was, buzzing for those 3 days because Australia, of course, is always draws a big crowd. And then after that tour game, they played the first test in Bangalore, which I officially covered for Cricinfo. So, which was my test debut, so to speak, as a reporter, and coincided with Michael Clarke's debut and also Darren Lehman's long, return from a long drought away from the test team. And I have really fond memories of that time and that series. I didn't do any of the other tests. I didn't do any of the other 3 tests, but just doing the tour game, being around the Australian team when they started out the tour, doing the Bangalore test, just all the stuff that goes into covering a series, just the pre-match press conferences. They had something called the press day back then where all the Australian players used to basically come around and then you get 5 minutes with each player and all the journalists hover around them, like birds over either dead flesh or food, whichever your analogy you want to pick. But all that. And then, Shane Warne, of course, was at his flamboyant best, and he would be at the bars in the night, and he would have some event. I think there was even he was being sponsored by VB at that time, Victoria Bitter, and they decided to have an event for him one evening, and he was perfectly placed for all those kinds of events. So he was at his social best, just meeting journalists as well. The first time that I actually got to see Peter Roebuck, Mike Coward, Peter Lawler covered that series, I remember, from the Australian, and photographers and everybody else who came. And then you also you see high-profile journalists coming to these test matches, who you don't often see in, just like a local Mumbai domestic game. You saw the first time I met Pradeep Magazine, the first time I probably saw, I'm pretty sure Suresh Menon was there at the test. I'm pretty sure I'd seen him before, but Suresh Menon was there at the test. Ramchandra Guha was there at the test. It's quite, it was quite a time for me personally.
How about you, Prashant? What were you doing in life at that time, and where were you living, and how were you following the series? What are some personal anecdotes about how you're following the series?
Yeah, so I was I was doing my MBA at the time in Pune in 2004. So my memory, actually, even the Champions Trophy in England, which West Indies just about won a few months before this series, and this series, there was no TV. There was no hostel there. We were staying as paying guests, so a bunch of our students was taking a flat together. So there was no TV. So we would all crowd up in this NCC canteen, which was just next to our college. And it was run by a gentleman from Karnataka. I don't know his name. We all used to call him Anna. He had one small TV and we would all kind of gather around it. The tables would all be rearranged and we'd be watching cricket. And then, of course, there was a break. And so I was in Chennai for the Nagpur test. So I watched the Nagpur test on TV from home.
Okay. So you came home to watch the Nagpur test, which was after the Chennai test.
Yeah. I was hoping for a comeback, but you know what happened in Nagpur.
Fair enough. Okay. For myself, I just joined, I just started working. I finished my BCom in 2004. I used to work in one of those back office, the great back office boom at that time. So I used to work in HP at the time. And my boss was like a fellow cricket nut. He's from Bengal. And so when the series was announced, he knew I was going to go for the test. Even before I asked for leave, he said, Mahesh, just go ahead and take it. Just go for the match. But the only condition he had was that, if I'm not wrong, the Chennai test was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I guess, the 4 days, and the fifth day was a Monday. He said, I don't care what's the share of the match. I don't care how badly you want to go for the fifth day. If you want to go for the first 2 days, you better come back on Monday. So this is the only agreement that I had with him. And in a way, it worked out pretty well because the test only had 4 days. The fifth day was washed out. And in fact, because I didn't go, some of my friends also didn't go. So when we were leaving for the day, the fourth day, there are people, waiting outside for buying tickets, right? Because perhaps they didn't have tickets. So we actually managed to sell it off. We sold off the last 3 tickets for like 75 rupees or something. So we thought, eventually we thought we got a great deal, right? I mean, of course, we were disappointed that we could have probably won a test match and so on. But we were just happy that we got something out of it. So yeah, I think I had very fond memories of this because the previous test that I watched in 2001, had the board exam in the background and so on. This is kind of pressure free. We could watch every ball without a worry in the world. And the series itself was interesting. I don't know if I should go into it now or not, but perhaps it's a good time to talk about it because that was also the time when Sehwag was kind of renovating the press box. So some of the press, the TV press was on the same terrace side, but the press, as in the written press, perhaps the media was on the D stand side. And I was a big fan of Peter Robak at that time. And after the Bangalore test, Peter Robak wrote a piece in Hindu, kind of saying Australia have cracked it, right? Here we are, the greatest team on earth has come fully prepared for the final frontier, and they've done it. Like after one test, right? Just one test. I was like, come on, dude. That's just too much, right? In fact, I had some posters, like some charts written against Peter Robak saying, what do you think now, assuming that India will go on to do well and so on. I was looking for him behind and I spotted him. I tried to show the chart. He didn't pay attention. The next day I did. He acknowledged and moved on. So, I mean, that's how immature I was. But it was kind of funny when I look back at it that think about it from his perspective. He was a writer writing about it. Perhaps he was writing for an Australian newspaper. It was like, carried by Hindu because of some agreement with Australia or something. He wouldn't expect Indians to take it seriously. I took one cricket writer's opinion, and that too, like an opinion piece, so seriously. So I remember that pretty well.
That's the true knowledgeable fan that Chennai produces. Yeah, I mean, they go after Peter Robak.
And I mean, what he wrote made perfect sense after like such a clinching victory in Bangalore. That's the kind of piece that you would write, right? That Australia have come fully prepared and they are like on course to conquer the final frontier.
Also, about talking about that Sehwag, I mentioned the 2004 Ranji final that I covered, right? Yeah, Mumbai, Tamil Nadu against Mumbai. That was fully the outdoor press box. So the indoor press box hadn't yet started operations then, but they were pretty much getting it ready for this test. Because the final was in April and the test was coming up. Everyone knew, I think by then they probably knew when the test was coming out. They knew that they would get a test because of the rotation and all that. So they were getting it ready. And I'm not surprised that test they had like an outside-inside arrangement. The other thing about Peter Robak, of course, which I don't know if it's true or not, is apparently on the fourth day night, he woke up at 3 a.m, looked out of his hotel room, and he saw that it was pouring down. And I mean, he was a betting man, so he went and put his money for a draw immediately, and he made a lot of money there. So you made 75 rupees, he probably made a killing over that.
No wonder. I read that story in the Visit report today, but it doesn't mention the name. It says some Australian journalist.
Yeah, so. I think he mentioned it in the next test or something. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, Sidvi, I actually have a question for you. Since you are at the CCI game, there are a couple of interesting accounts of how the Australians planned for the series. One of those accounts is in Gilchrist's autobiography, where he talks about how they had a session with an ex-cricketer in Bombay called Vasu. I think they were talking about Vasu Paranjpe, where they came up with the idea of bowling straight, bowling at the stumps rather than bowling outside the off stump. It's kind of interesting because just a couple of days back, I saw a tweet from Kartikeya Date where he had scraped some Hawkeye data, and he was basically arguing the same point, saying that you are far more effective when you attack the stumps and set the field accordingly to cut off the runs. But it's really interesting that they had this conversation. They had this conversation in Bombay with Vasu Paranjpe, and he advised them and spoke about the importance of controlling run flow in India. So was that something that happened before the game or at the game, or was he there at the game?
I don't remember if Vasu Paranjpe was at the game, but I wouldn't have been surprised if he was, because I mean, he used to generally be at games in Mumbai. I remember reading this vaguely. In fact, I wanted to revisit the Gilchrist biography before coming on this chat, but I didn't do that. But yes, I remember reading this vaguely. But one thing I do remember from that trip was that almost all the players were talking about the 2001 series, because many of them had come in 2001, that famous series, and they played, and they were all talking about the lessons that we have picked up from that series. And though they weren't too, they didn't spell out exactly what they were doing. They were talking about how they had gone back to that series and analyzed it and seen why it is. Because for them, I mean, it was quite a shock to have actually lost that series, right? I mean, as it would for any team. I mean, you come here winning on a streak of 16 test matches, you win 15, and then you win in Mumbai so comprehensively, and then you go on to lose those absolute classics of those two test matches. So I think a lot of that played on their mind, and I think by then, because they were hammering England anyway, left, right, center, by then India had become their focus. So for a long time before that series, I mean, they were planning very seriously for India and how they could actually win here. And the CCI game. I mean, one thing I remember about the CCI game is that Glenn McGrath was just at a different level in that game. I mean, first of all, you're watching him against the Ranji Trophy team, right? Like the best team in the country. So obviously he's bowling against batsmen who are not like at the elitist quality, but still he's bowling at really good players like, Amol Muzumdar, Wasim Jafar, all these players. I mean, they are like extremely good, and all of them test quality. I mean, Muzumdar didn't play, but definitely test quality in my opinion. But the manner in which he bowled those overs, and CCI also from the press box, you get a really good view of the bowling as well. And Glenn McGrath was I was just blown away by the consistency with which he was getting that off stump line and just toying with him. I mean, it's almost like he can get that line and length exactly as he wants, and then he'll just get that little bit of 1 inch cut here or 1 inch cut there, and that's it. He'll finish you off. So it was almost like watching a fast spinner bowl, and that time, by that time, I don't think I understood exactly what Australia were going to do in the test matches in terms of the line or in terms of the fields they were going to set, in terms of the general sort of much more conservative approach that they took in the series compared to 2001 when it was all out, right? All out attack. But it was pretty clear that, they spoke about 2001 a lot in the build-up.
Yeah, so which takes me to my next point. I want to understand a little bit about the context of the series. So of course, you have something in your memory. So I was thinking that, okay, India went to Australia. And we had the drawn series. Then India played Pakistan, and then Australia came back. But I was looking at the Australian schedule, particularly here, to kind of understand what is happening. I'm a little bit blown away by the kind of cricket calendar they had at that time, especially for a cricket board notorious now to find the faintest of excuse to not play like any team which is not box office. They played Bangladesh at home. They played Sri Lanka at home. Then they played India at home. Then they went to Sri Lanka. They again hosted Sri Lanka at home before coming here. So it was a time when they actually had a space in the calendar to host a test series against Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, and Sri Lanka in a matter of 1.5 years. And in fact, they also hosted this in Darwin and Cairns during their so-called winter months. And I found that fascinating. You read about Australian geography and so on, but when it truly hit me was when I realized that they can actually play cricket during their non-summer months. In like faraway lands, it had such a profound impact on me that I went to Darwin a couple of years back with my family. I mean, Darwin, nobody thinks of cricket, right? In fact, they even, like when I asked people there about the cricket ground, they actually said, we don't have a cricket ground, we only have an AFL ground. I went there to check out how it looks like. Now it's like there's not a trace of cricket there, but that's where they played cricket. So that's something that struck me when I look back at it, because that completely erased from my memory.
Bangladesh played in Darwin and Cairns, or Sri Lanka?
Yeah, both. So Bangladesh played Darwin and Cairns the previous year. The next year, around June, July, Sri Lanka also played there.
I remember that it was the push towards, first of all, getting more international cricket in the northern part of the country. And also, yeah, they had the weather advantage there, which they could use. I remember those tests vaguely because I think I might have even covered some of TV and written some reports for the Sri Lanka test and all that. But yeah, I mean, and also, I think the last time Bangladesh went to Australia, right? That I don't think they've ever gone after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is quite bizarre too. And talking about Sri Lanka, didn't Australia go to Sri Lanka after they went to India or the year after that? I mean, when again they won all three tests.
Yeah, that was before. So they went to Sri Lanka, then they hosted
before.
Sri Lanka at home.
That was
then
actually,
they came to India.
That was Warne's comeback after the
correct.
ban. Yeah.
And that was the series where they trailed in all three tests and won all of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was quite a shocker.
Also known as Ranji Trophy series because they've conceded first innings lead in all three games.
That series also, I remember watching on TV, and that was basically the Damien Martyn's extraordinary run that he started there, and he continued into the India series, and that was his purple patch that he was having at that time, and and that Sri Lanka series was quite. Actually, I've never revisited that series again. I wonder if there are many YouTube clips of it or something. I should check it out. It was quite a. I mean, even though Australia won 3-0, I think it was a really good series to watch. That one. There's really tense matches.
No, and also Warne and Murli were both sort of at the peak of their powers. They were.
Yeah. In fact, they were toggling as between being the highest wicket taker. Correct.
It was a lovely.
I might have even written a piece actually about the progression of the Test record with the wickets and how Warne and Murli were basically going at it. Like one guy would get 3 wickets and become the record holder, and the other guy would then get 4 wickets and beat him. So. Yeah.
In fact, Shane Warne overtakes again Murli in this series in Chennai, where I think probably second or third wicket that he takes, and he shows the ball to the crowd.
Yeah.
So sorry, coming back to the series, sorry for the slight distraction, but I couldn't help but talk about the fact that Australia used to do this in the not too distant past. But just what was your sense of the series? Like, did it appear to be a close contest, or did you think that Australia will come? I mean, the previous 2 series were reasonably close. I mean, India won in 2001, and the drawn series in Australia in 2003-04. But of course, the 3-4 series didn't have Warne and McGrath. And 2004, like coming into this, Sachin was not playing, but Australia did. I mean, you would expect Australia to come better prepared and so on. So what was your sense of expectations going into the series? Prashant, why don't you get started?
So for some reason, when I was watching this series, it struck me as a very natural sequel to 2001. The 2003-04 series just seemed very different. But here, everything seemed to pick up from where 2001 left off. Like my final memory of 2001 was McGrath and Gillespie bowling their heart out that last day in Chennai. I mean, you were there. You must have been quite something to watch live. They were getting dehydrated. They were going off and probably throwing up and coming back and bowling. And when 2004 began, they sort of continued in that vein. They were very much leading Australia's attack in that series. And also the tactics, right? So the first test, I remember when Harbhajan Singh is bowling to Hayden, right? I remember a lot of thought has gone into, because they now know that Hayden sweeps, right? And he's got the slap sweep. So a lot of thought has gone into where they position fielders around that sweep shot. So mid-wicket suddenly goes squarer. The minute Harbhajan Singh starts bowling, right? It's neither a mid-wicket nor is it a square leg. It's not fully on the boundary. It's not really up either. It is very clearly with a memory in mind. That man has been positioned there because they've been hammered by this guy 3 years ago. And promptly he plays the sweep and it goes down the fielder's throat. So it just seemed almost like a fourth test in some ways. It's like they were picking up where they left off in 2001.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. The sequel part is extremely striking because even we saw it that way. I'm sure even Australia saw it that way, right? The whole final frontier thing also helped, right? The whole build-up that Steve Waugh gave. And then they didn't go on to finish it. So you know that they were going to come back for conquering the final frontier in 2004.
And also, like one of the things that was a big deal then and never rarely becomes a big deal after that is Sachin missing the first two tests. I mean, that was a pretty big deal back then, I remember. And, Indian fans still talk about like that 2018 win in Australia and say, Steve Smith wasn't there and this guy wasn't there and all that. But hardly people mention this when they talk about Australia's famous win in India, that Sachin missed the first two tests. And that was a huge deal because, I mean, given Tendulkar's record against Australia and given the fact that it was a pretty, yes, the Bangalore test and the Nagpur test can be seen as heavy defeats. But at the same time, with one player getting a big score, you never know what could have happened in Bangalore. I mean, Nagpur would have probably been a defeat anyway. And Sachin also played in Nagpur. But, it was not as much of a rout of a series as it is generally remembered in the imagination. I think Bangalore could have been a lot closer with, one big partnership, and Chennai definitely could have gone India's way on the last day. And then you never know. So, yeah, I remember Sachin's absence being a big deal at that time. But by then, India-Australia had become really big. I think the two series before that had made it the preeminent rivalry in cricket. And England had also not reached that 2005 England stage where they would go on to win the Ashes. So England were also still just at the upward swing. So India-Australia was huge. I mean, that series was quite big. In fact, there were columns being written about how, they should have been like 2 or 3 warm-up games so that you have a better build-up to the series. It's a 4-test series. There's only one warm-up game and all that. So there was a build-up for more of a buzz and more of a hype around the series.
Okay. And question to both of you. Did you know much about tennis elbow before this episode of tennis elbow? Like, I don't think I even knew that there was an injury, or it is a part of your body, or it's a kind of an injury or whatever.
I had no idea. First of all, I don't even remember when I first heard about it, but it's very likely that it is possible that was the phase when I first heard about it, because I don't think this was any other famous athlete or anyone else had it when I was growing up, at least.
I mean, cricket taught us all anatomy, so we learned about rotator cuff, we learned about Achilles tendon, we learned about tennis elbow is the latest thing. Everyone got I think a lot of people in our generation found out about stuff like this only because of cricket.
And also tennis elbow, I never realized how serious it was. You hear tennis elbow, you're like, oh, okay, it's an injury that tennis players usually pick up on the elbow. That's the first thing that strikes you, right? But then there was an interview that Sachin later gave to, I think it must have been to Sharda, when he said that things got so bad that he could not even pick up a teacup, the way he would normally to drink his cup of tea. And that's when I realized, oh man, that's really serious. Like that's, that can't be easy. If you can't even pick up a cup of tea, that's quite shattering.
And the thing is, these days, I don't know, perhaps it's just we have become, more aware of fitness and so on since then. But these days, I see it commonly referred to as tennis elbow and golfer's elbow, right? Like basically on one side of the arm, if you have pain, it's commonly referred to as tennis elbow. And on the inner arm, if there's pain, it's commonly referred to as golfer's elbow. And it's not even because only golfers get it. Even like if you work in your computer for too long, you could possibly get it. And I run into colleagues who say this, like, oh, I had tennis elbow, I went to a physiotherapist. I'm like, you have no idea when I found out and in what context I found out such a thing exists,
Tennis elbow bringing on waves of nostalgia.
Yeah, exactly. I learned tennis elbow from the greatest batsman in my lifetime, like greatest cricketer or whatever, not quite cricketer, but batsman of my time. Anyway, back to the series here. Let's start from Bangalore, for instance. I think that's a good place to start because I was completely taken aback with how prepared Australia was coming into the series, in terms of the way they were dealing with the weather, in terms of the in-out field that they were setting, in terms of how conservative they were, right? I mean, the earlier Australian teams were known to be aggressive and they backed themselves to win at all costs and so on. But this one was a lot more calculated. But what completely took me away was Michael Clarke's debut. I did not expect, I mean, I knew Marco was a fantastic player of spin, but I did not expect an Aussie to bat the way he did. So what was your first impression of that? How did you react to that? Silly, particularly for you, you must have seen it at the ground, and also you're a journalist, so you had to have the distance. So how did you see that innings?
Yeah, so my first sighting of Clarke was in the CCI game before that in the tour game, and by then all these he was like hyped up in the Australian press already, and all the Australian journalists were basically pretty sure that he was likely to play that first test. And I mean, he interestingly he didn't have a major first class average coming in to that series, but he was built up as this next big thing. I mean, pretty much Ricky Ponting. He was the next Ricky Ponting, right? And all the Aussies were, watching him, and they were like, I remember, some journalists were actually writing pieces only about him, like focused on him. And that is quite a big deal, right? Like a player coming into a squad, that to a great Australian squad, and you're writing pieces fully focused on him. I mean, it's like Indian journalists writing fully on, I don't know, some new guy who has not even played a test. It's not that common. So it was pretty clear that he was likely to play. But then, yeah, I mean, in Mumbai, he didn't use his feet as much as he would do in Bangalore, actually. I mean, he was playing a lot from the crease, and occasionally he was coming out it's probably Bahutule, who was bowling. I forgot the other spinners. I can look it up. But yeah, I don't remember him using much of his feet at all. Much of his feet. I mean, there was a bit. But in Bangalore, yeah, I mean, he was like out. He was jumping out from the get-go, I mean, and you could almost see that, okay, here's a guy who had decided this is how he was going to approach spin, and this is how he was going to play. And it's quite refreshing to see. I mean, you rarely see, even now, you rarely see an Australian batsman who is so, adept at using his footwork against spin. Many of them, watch the ball off the hand and then they decide to play depending on that. And of course, we remember, I mean, there were times when Ponting and others have had their own challenges against spin, but Clarke was magnificent. And Kumble actually bowled very well in that test, in that Bangalore test. He got quite a few wickets. In fact, Australia were, they were in a bit of bother. And Harbhajan also bowled magnificently. I remember both Harbhajan and Kumble bowled really well in that test. But the way Clarke and Gilchrist played was amazing. I mean, they took the game away from India. I mean, until then, I think when they got that Lehman wicket, it was pretty close. The score was pretty close, but that Clarke-Gilchrist partnership took it away. And yeah, it was amazing. Of course, the famous moment for Michael Clarke was that he gets on 98 or something on the second day, and Zahir Khan is bowling, but then he calls for his baggy green cap and instead of his helmet. And even though the fast bowler is bowling, and then he gets to his 100 and then he kisses his baggy green and all that. So that was quite a moment of a showman. But yeah, I mean, there was a gush around in the press box, and Mike Coward was there, and Mike Coward was talking about how, since Greg Blewett, no Australian batsman had scored 100 on debut, and Blewett had done it in the early 90s. Or mid 90s. So there was a lot of expectation, and he lived up to that promise. And was a fantastic moment.
So that knock actually reminded me a lot of Slater and Mark Waugh in '98 in Bangalore in Harbhajan's debut game, actually. So Harbhajan had just dismissed Greg Blewett.
Yeah, fantastic ball.
Fantastic ball. Okay, it's like brilliant ball. You just dismissed Greg Blewett. And Mark Waugh and Slater decide to attack Harbhajan by stepping out. And they both do it really, really well. And particularly Slater is really fast on his feet. So Michael Clarke reminded me a lot of that kind of Australian batsman. The kind who will jump out and play. But interestingly, my memory, I could be wrong, but my memory of that innings was that he was doing it to Kumble more than Harbhajan, which is amazing because Kumble is actually the harder bowler to advance to. He's quicker through the air. It's harder to step out to Kumble. But he did it, and he did it amazingly well.
One difference, though, between the Marquardt Slater style and Michael Clarke style is that Clarke was coming out of the wicket and defending. That is something you rarely saw with an Australian batsman. I mean, you see a lot of Asian batsmen doing that, but mostly when Marquardt came out, you're pretty sure he was going to go
Correct.
over the top.
Correct.
He was going to go for a big one. But Clarke was actually coming down and pushing it back to the bowler. And that was like, oh man, okay, so this guy is like confident enough to even play a defensive stroke coming down the track. So that was good. Yeah.
And on the same wicket, right? Damien Martyn tried to do the same thing. Couldn't get to and Kumble, like you said, was bowling really well, got the ball to bounce, went off the glove, went to short leg. So it was not like it was a flat track or something. There was something there, and Kumble was getting the ball to jump. This guy batted beautifully.
Yeah, I was also looking at, in fact, my memory of that Gilchrist innings was blank. I completely forgot about the Gilchrist innings till I kind of went back and watched the highlights and saw the scorecard, because I remember the Mumbai 2001 innings distinctly. But I, for some reason, I just remember Michael Clarke's innings from this. It's almost like, okay, I had to be reminded of the Gilchrist innings. And the Gilchrist thing that amazes me is usually, like Gilchrist, we've discussed in some other podcasts before, is the ultimate luxury for any cricket team, right? And not just because he was a great wicketkeeper batsman, but Australia was blessed with this bowling attack where they didn't have to play the fifth bowler, which meant most of his career, I was just looking at his career. So about 75 matches he played at number 7. Right. If you had a batting talent of Adam Gilchrist, most teams would be tempted to add a fifth bowler and play him at 6 and 5 and so on. Even with Pant, we are doing that, right? But this guy was the ultimate luxury because they never, even in this test, I was looking at it, they played Kasparovich, but they still played only 4 bowlers. And that's primarily because they had McGrath and Warne, right? If you had those two, then Gilchrist becomes so much more potent, right?
So again, going back to 2001 with Gilchrist, right? In his book, he writes about how after the Bombay test, where he gets that amazing 100, he talks about how he and Buchanan get a little obsessed with sweeping, right? And he talks about how Buchanan keeps challenging him to play different kinds of sweeps. And if you look at his dismissals in 2001, after that Bombay test, he gets out playing across the line a lot. So it was really interesting in Bangalore, especially in this 100 here. He was sweeping not on length, he was sweeping on line. He was being a lot more selective on when he's going to employ the sweep. And he was hitting down the ground more than he did in 2001. So that again felt like there is a very clear memory there, and there's a very clear learning and maybe an adaptation of his game plan.
True. And that you could see throughout, even Damien Martyn that you mentioned, he did play a lot more of the back foot in Sri Lanka, for instance, but here he made the mistake of coming on the front foot, especially against Kumble. And he more than made amends in the next test in Chennai, where he was trying to play a lot more off the pitch, trying to read the bowlers off the pitch. And I remember watching it in the ground, I was like, wow. This guy is from Western Australia, right? He must have grown up in like the hard wickets in Western Australia. He comes, and to go forward is the natural instinct when you're playing spin in India. To kind of curb that instinct for such a prolonged period of time and to be as successful as he was just mind-blowing. Sorry, just to go back to the Bangalore test again. Do you remember, both of you, do you remember this in-out field to be some sort of a new thing in this Bangalore test? Because I don't remember. To me, when I think of the in-out field, I felt like it was born in this series in 2004. Perhaps it was done in like bits and pieces before, but it was not done in such a methodical, systemic way as they did in this series. Was that apparent to you in the first test itself, Siddiq?
Yeah. It was very apparent. This was from the first innings that India played itself, it was very apparent. And, it was clear that Australia were not just setting fields to get wickets, but they were also setting fields to restrict the runs. And, where often they would have fielders at square leg, or on the boundary, but none of the bowlers would bowl short. They would all bowl the, wicket taking length, just on off or just maybe slightly outside off, but mostly on off. And that was that was basically because in case they erred in line and got on the pads and the batsman flicked, they didn't want that to be a boundary. They wanted that to be a single. And that was very clear from the first innings itself. And, when Lakshman was batting, that was even clearer because there was always a fielder out there. And, and anytime he flicked, the ball would go and he would only get a single. And I think that was a big lesson they learned from 2001, where they probably gave away like some, 300 runs or something to him by bowling to him on the pads. And it was very apparent. The other one is, you said you forgot about Gilchrist innings. I completely forgot about Simon Katich from that series. And what an amazing, effect he was having on the top of the order. Right from the Bangalore test, he scored, I think the scorecard, he scored 81 in Bangalore at number 3. I mean, First of all, to be number 3 in an Australian lineup, leave alone a great Australian lineup. I mean, it's such a, it's like you're taking the spot of Bradman and, all the greats who batted at number 3 there. I mean, Ian Chappell still says your best batsman bats at number 3. And you had Simon Katich batting at number 3 in that batting order and doing well. I mean, again, Katich, another fantastic player against spin, had a very different style, I would say, to a few other players from that team, but effective, extremely effective. And, his 81 on the first day would really set it up for them. I'm looking at the scorecard. When Lehman got out, Lehman again came back into that test and was also known as a murderer of spin bowling, especially in Australian domestic cricket. He had this reputation coming in of being like the king against spin. But of course, he got out. It was 149 for 4. And 149 for 4 in a test in India could easily end up being 220 all out, and with Kumble and Harbhajan bowling so well. So Clarke and Gilchrist really, really bailed them out of that little bit of a hole. And then they got 400 plus. And then when they bowled so well with such accuracy and, such planning, McGrath, again, fantastic. Warne, probably his best spell in India, I would say, in that test. The way he bowled in that game was just absolutely stunning. Then, by then they had the game going for them.
So actually, one other memory that I have, which stayed in my mind, was the ball that Irfan Pathan bowled to Justin Langer to get him out after he got a 50. Like, I think it would have been somewhere around the 20th over or so, somewhere around then. Okay. So the ball had just started reversing, and it reminded me of that ball that he bowled to Gilchrist in Sydney. Like this reverse swinging Yorker almost. It looked really dramatic, and I came when I think back at that series, I think I think of that dismissal. But then when I look at the stats, I realized that he only took 2 wickets in that entire series, Irfan Pathan, right? And this is like one of them. And I come away remembering Irfan Pathan as having this amazing series when in fact he's only taken 2 wickets. And on the flip side, you have someone like McGrath, okay, who took 15 wickets. Gillespie took 20 wickets. I'm struggling to remember, simply because the wickets are not as dramatic or as sexy as this one. Because this one, and that's the thing with Irfan Pathan, right? He's a very YouTube-friendly bowler. You remember all his dismissals because of how dramatic they were.
2001 series, Harbhajan Singh 32 wickets, Zahir Khan and Tendulkar 4 wickets each. That's all. End of story.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, right? I mean, I actually still my mind is boggled by that stat. It's like India won a series with one guy basically taking 32 wickets, and the second best wicket tally in that series was 4 wickets.
Yeah, and Sachin took 3 of them in one innings.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry, Sidney, you were mentioning about Shane Warne, and I know that he did take a five wicket haul, the only one that he took in India in Chennai. But this spell was quite something, especially the balls that he bowled to Lakshman in both the innings. The first one, like I was watching the highlights. I was not watching it with the volume, and I saw that. I'm like, wow! I remember that as a great ball, but I didn't quite make the connection with the Gatting ball at that time. Perhaps, in fact, then I played it with volume, and the commentators are actually making that connection. Perhaps I must have listened to this, but it kind of completely receded from my memory that this is almost as good as a Gatting ball, if not greater, because I would like to believe Lakshman is a better player of spin. And again in the second innings, because he bowled this ball in the first innings, he actually bowls a very similar sort of length and line, but this time a flipper. And Lakshman goes forward, covers the line, but then gets out LBW. So to get a player of Lakshman's caliber sort of in two distinct ways in the same match tells you that a fitter and a more prepared Warne was a completely different sort of bowler as compared to the 2001 version that we saw.
Yeah, I mean, he was sensational in that match, and he didn't get a 5 wicket haul in either innings, but the spells itself and the way he was troubling the batsman. I mean, Lakshman, in fact, has spoken about that dismissal, and he says how he had he gone a bit more forward and to cover the drift of the ball, then it would have hit his pad, and it would have not. But he says he didn't go forward enough, and so basically ended up missing him and going on to hit the stumps. That was a great ball, but Warne bowled like a lot of really good balls in that spell that didn't get wickets. And it was great to watch him. And this whole narrative of Shane Warne getting hammered in India and all. I mean, that's all like based on that, like probably like the Chennai test in. I mean, you had two tests in '98, Chennai and Calcutta, and then you had the tests in 2001, where actually Warne himself says he didn't bowl that badly. So but you take 2004, and Shane Warne was just brilliant throughout I mean, I think he played 3 tests. He didn't play the Mumbai test, but the Bangalore spell was brilliant. It was great to watch, and he was getting drift. He was doing what he wanted. And again, the Bangalore press box back then was outdoor. It was the outdoor press box still being used, and so you could actually it had the view it had was you could see Warne. You could actually see Warne much better than you probably can now. And you probably can see a leg spinner now. And yeah, I loved it. Loved watching that spell.
So actually on the Lakshman dismissals, right? The interesting thing, actually, when you look at the dismissal, the first one looks more dramatic, right? But actually, if you think about it, the second one is even more ingenious, because when you're bowling a big spinning leg break, you're basically bowling a little more round arm. So your point of delivery is slightly lower. The genius about the second dismissal is that he's bowling a flipper, but from the same position from which he would bowl a leg break. So given what happened to Lakshman in the first innings, and given where he's seeing the arm coming from, it helps in the deception. And so then when he bowls it from the front of the hand, it's like the killer blow. So it was just absolutely magnificent. It was him at his best. And also on the subject that you were talking about, Sidvi, I mean, 98, he had a shoulder injury. 2001, he had a finger injury. But I think the character of the man is that you ask him about VVS Lakshman and he will be only generous. There will never be a postscript saying that when I was fit, I got him. No, never. When he talks about it,
no, never.
His praise is fulsome, and it shows how secure he is and how generous he is.
Even about Calcutta, he genuinely mentioned when I interviewed him, he said, I probably bowled like 20 bad balls in a innings where I bowled in a test match where I bowled 50 overs. So, out of 300 balls that I bowled, I probably bowled 20 bad balls. The good thing for them was that they hit all those 20 balls for boundaries, which means they got, around 80 runs there itself. But he says, what about the other 280 balls that I bowled? I bowled them really well.
So also, interestingly, when he came back in 2012 as a commentator, he spoke about the lesson that he learned in 2004, which is that you either attack with the ball and defend with the field, or you defend with the ball and attack with the field. So if conditions are helpful, you have attacking fields, you're not trying to do too many different things, and you're basically doing what Jimmy Anderson does in England, which is basically testing the batsman's defense, not trying too much fancy. But when it's a little bit easier to bat, then you need the in and out field, and then you need to bring out your bag of tricks and do all of this. And so that game was brilliant. I mean, it was the best of one, even though he got more wickets in Chennai. I thought Bangalore was very special.
Yeah, that's true. And Chennai, he had more runs. So therefore he got more overs and he got more wickets.
The one thing I must mention about Warne, which came up actually at some point during the series, I remember, is that what the Australians, it was, I don't know which of the Australians mentioned it, but they made the comparison again to 2001 and where, and 98 also, both 98 and 2001, where Warne came into bowl at India's, a lot of times to India's top order. But in 2004, because of the bowling attack, the fast bowling attack being so good and so penetrative, Warne often came in bowling to the middle order. He rarely bowled to the openers or to the number 3 in that series. And by the time he came in, India were under pressure. So which meant that they couldn't take the risks that they could have had they not been losing wickets. So coming down the track and hitting him over the top and all was pretty much going to be a huge risk when it was only the middle order and the rest to come. So that was also a big plus for Warne, that he had the fast bowling to put the pressure straight away. And then he could basically be in control of his spells through the series.
Yeah, sorry, moving on to the Chennai test, which was, of course, Warne's only 5-wicket haul in India. But before we talk about Warne, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Kumble spell there, which was one of the greatest spells I've seen in my life. But before we get to the merits of the bowling, I just wanted to bring in my personal sort of frustrating experience of watching it from the ground. And it was also the time where I was, for some reason, I hated Ganguly's captaincy. I mean, there was a good reason to not like Ganguly as a test cricketer, but there was no real reason to hate a captaincy as such. But that's just me talking now. But at that time, I found him to be one very, very particular about his ideas and not very agile and flexible. And more importantly, I was very frustrated that he was giving this lengthy spell to Harbhajan and he was not getting Kumble on to bowl. And that goes with the history of him, picking Harbhajan over Kumble and so on, right? And then finally, Kumble came on to bowl. And my goodness, when Kumble is in a spell, I mean, not just Kumble, actually any spinner in a spell, as much as it's fun to watch batting in the ground, it is really the bowling, which is, even though you don't appreciate the nuance sitting in the ground, just the buzz that gets generated, because every ball there's an appeal, every ball there's something happening, and then there's a heap of wickets falling together, especially after a big partnership. To me, that's the best stadium experience, at least in India. If you have to watch a match in India, you got to watch a collapse against a great spinner. That is simply unmatched as a stadium experience. So to me, that was special. And of course, Kumble bowled beautifully. He got them. This was also the time when Kumble was developing his googly, and in Australia he bowled well. He had a little bit more flight, and he had the googly that anybody can see. But as he himself said, it still adds to his arsenal. But you also have the classic Kumble dismissals in that, right? The fast sort of pushing them back. Michael Clarke came down the ground so many times in Bangalore, and all of a sudden he gets Kumbled in the classic sort of Kumble way. So that was fun to watch. But what I remember distinctly is also Gilchrist's comment at the end of the day, if I'm not wrong, perhaps at the end of the match. I think at the end of the day, where he compared this Kumble spell to the great deadly spells by fast bowlers, and he talks about Ambrose's spell in Perth. That is, I was quite pleased to see Gilchrist talking about this spell in that league, because usually like English and West Australian cricketers don't tend to do that. They tend to say, oh, he's a great bowler in these conditions and so on. So, I remember that comment from Gilchrist distinctly.
I think, Australia were 136 for no loss, referring to the scorecard. And then to go from that for Kumble to get 7 wickets and for them to get 220. I mean, that was like electric, right? I mean, in a match in India and with the crowds like that and Kumble bowling. And also, I think that the Chennai pitch, I mean, it's probably again like 98 to 2010 was probably the heyday of the Chennai pitch, right? Like almost every test there was magnificent. I mean, and usually would go till the fifth day and, till the end of the fifth day. In fact, 99, 2001, 99 was fourth day, but still, the went till the almost went the distance. Uh, and 2004 was part of that, right? I mean, again, could have been a fifth day classic. And the bounce on the first day of that wicket, I think pretty much was what Kumble worked on, which the other bowlers couldn't because they didn't have the speed and the fizz that Kumble could get from that length, right? And his top spinners, like absolutely on that kind of surface, how do you even play that top spinner, right? I mean, it's too difficult to get forward. When you get back and you miss it, you're dead. It's unbelievably hard to play a bowler like that on that kind of a pitch. I mean, I think that was like a Kumble pitch. If ever we have to categorize a pitch as a Kumble pitch, that was it. And day one, a spinner getting 7 wickets on day one. How often does that happen? Yeah. I mean, it does happen now, but it's still quite an achievement.
So I think, like Mahesh said, 2001 he missed with an injury, the Australia series, and when he came back after that injury, I think he made a conscious decision to bowl a little bit slower and add a little bit more guile to what he was doing. But my other recollections from what I saw on TV was that the Indian close catching throughout that series was really, really good. I mean, whether it was Akash Chopra, Yuvraj Singh, Mohammad Kaif, they were fantastic around the back. They fully backed up Harbhajan and Kumble both. Kumble got a lot more wickets at short leg and all that.
Except Parthiv.
Okay, please tell me you are not one of those people who was barracking Parthiv Patel.
No, I was not. In fact, I like the guy and he played pretty well in Chennai. So,
yeah.
In fact, if I'm not wrong, I was thinking about this. If I'm not wrong, there was a series in Sri Lanka which Dhoni decided to take rest, right? And Dinesh Karthik replaced him. And after a couple of tests, Dinesh Karthik had a couple of bad tests with the gloves. I think Parthiv replaces him. I was thinking about it now when I was looking at the scorecard that it was the reverse where Parthiv was replaced by Dinesh Karthik.
Yeah. But I mean, also on that point, it's really interesting. I mean, it's a sign of the times, I think. The way people who are covering the game, they had no problem at all making statements like, Parthiv Patel cost India this test match and things like that. I mean, they are horrible, horrible remarks to make. But there were people who were writing that way back then. I don't think anyone would do that now. Thankfully, it's moved on from that.
No,
what do you mean anyone will do that now?
Right now we have the extreme. The writers don't do that, but the TV is like so crazy. They will call you a traitor, anti-national. You have no idea what they can call you.
I mean, the medium that TV is the medium that matters now anyway. So it doesn't matter what the writers are doing. I mean, eventually every night there'll be Match Ka Mujrim segments where every player will be butchered for his poor performance.
So, I mean, interestingly, apparently, Adam Gilchrist also got hammered for his keeping in that test. In his book, he talks about how Darren Berry wrote this nasty column about how Parthiv Patel and Adam Gilchrist took wicket keeping to new depths or something like that, and he became really upset. And it was like,
yeah. And we mustn't forget that Gilchrist was captaining the side for the first 3 tests. And so that was an additional thing for him as well. I mean, sort of the responsibility / pressure of captaining an Australian side through that series. So, yeah, it was a really important series for him and great that he could pull it off.
Yeah, that also gives some consolation that a full-time captain is still not conquered India. It takes a part-time captain.
I think Bill Lawry was a full-time captain.
Yeah, since Bill Lawry, of course.
Since Bill Lawry.
Yeah. So, sorry, Siddhi, were you covering that match or what was it? I remember there was some big thing. You covered Bangalore, but not Chennai.
No, that's it. Only Bangalore. After the Bangalore test, I didn't cover the other three. So what Cricinfo used to do back then is that one person used to go for each test. So I was fortunate enough to cover both the tour game and the Bangalore test. But then after that, Amit Verma went for the Chennai test. Somebody else went to the Nagpur test, and somebody else went for the Mumbai test.
Okay, fair enough.
So Mahesh, I have to ask you though.
Sure.
Which 155 is better?
I usually my dilemma when it comes to which 155 is always between Sachin's two 155s. One was Bloemfontein, one was Chennai.
No, the Chennai context. You know
I know,
exactly what I'm asking.
And then this came about, and we were talking. In fact, we were talking about this while it was happening because one of my friends, I did not see the 155 live in Chennai at that time, in the 98 one. But one of my friends who saw both, who's Sachin Bhakt, but around that time, he was going through this phase of hating Sachin for some reason. So there was this 2002 NatWest final where Sachin gets out and subsequently Yuvraj and Kaif go on to win the match. I don't know, something happened to him that day. Since then, he started hating Sachin. Before that, if I happened to sit in his house and like plant my feet on a table, and if my feet were pointing to Sachin, he will take offense. He will take offense and send me out of the house. That's how much of a buck he was. He had completely turned the other way around. And in that match, in that innings, he was sitting in the stand and saying, I think this is a better 155. Like immediately after Sehwag got out. I was like, no way. I mean, I was impressed with that Sehwag's innings. But to me, that 155 is like in a whole different league. You can't compare the two. So he was like just needling me throughout, saying this 155 is better. So when you're asking me this question, like you're transporting me back to that frustrating sort of phase where I was sitting with him and he was just like needling me throughout.
But now with the perspective, what do you think?
No, I don't know. In terms of batsmanship, that Sachin's 150 was in a different league. But if you add like the quality of bowling attack,
that's what. So I'll needle you and say that Warne, McGrath.
Okay.
Yeah.
as much as KD is like trying to veer me towards this rationalist view of cricket, sorry, there are some secret things that I don't want to revisit. I am not going to entertain this conversation. The Sachin 155 is the pinnacle of batsmanship for me.
Yeah, the thing about it's interesting though how like a piece of a piece of writing or a piece of cricket writing can actually make you remember an innings so much more vividly and fondly. And this Sehwag 155 has the benefit of that piece, that Anatomy of a Classic, where Chandrahas Chowdhury and Nishant Arora sat with him to watch that innings and talk about it. And, that's such a marvelous piece to read and very, very rare to get from an Indian, at least from an Indian cricketer who actually sits with you, watches an innings and talks about it. So I think the fact that Sehwag was actually open enough to go so deep into that innings and, to the extent that he even sort of speaks about the fields that Australia was setting, how they were bowling, why he was playing this shot, why he was not playing that shot, why, he goes into detail of why he was not square cutting McGrath, but actually trying to wait for the length where he could play him back off the straight bat. And he says on that kind of pitch in Chennai, if you square cut, then you ran the chance of the ball basically playing on basically. So he said but if it was a true pitch, if it was a pitch with like a proper bounce and true bounce, then he said I would have had no problem cutting. But he says on that particular kind of pitch, I would prefer to like play straight off the vertical back. So insights like that, and him talking about playing against Shane Warne, and the way he was taking his front leg out of the leg stump and trying to hit him up against the turn, which is quite this thing. So all that made me appreciate that 155. Hopefully, I don't know, even if someone sits with Sachin and watches that innings, if he will get as much insight, because Sachin will probably say, yeah, I just played my natural game or something. But I think that helps. It helps to have a good piece of writing to accompany an innings.
No, true. And that piece also demonstrated how Sehwag is such a thinking cricketer, right?
Exactly. Exactly what I was going to say. It's so sad that people kind of reduce him to a caricature when they say that he's just a see ball, hit ball kind of. You can't play at that level just by seeing ball and hitting ball. And it involves a serious evaluation of risk and evaluation of the conditions and all of that. And I'm sure he did all of that. But he also seems to be happy to go along with that kind of trope.
No, there's even like a moment in that whole piece where he talks about how there's a fielder in square, out in square leg or mid-wicket or something, and Warne is bowling, and Sehwag is basically taking his front foot out and chipping it through that mid-wicket region for a single. And so, he's being asked, like, why are you doing that? I mean, isn't there a chance of you getting out or something? First of all, you're going against the turn. Secondly, there's a fielder there. He said, no, because I'm not hitting, strong enough for it to reach the fielder. I'm just chipping it. And even if it goes in the air, it's fine because there's no fielder close in and there's only a fielder there. So for me, I just want to, get the single. There's an easy way for me to get the single. And, stuff like that. I mean, it's not like a see ball, hit ball guy is going to give you all this. And who test cricket, how can you play test cricket by just seeing ball, hitting ball? I mean, it's not a joke, right? I mean, come on. Even a player like Shrikant, who is probably the archetypical see ball, hit ball, was not so simplistic. I mean, I'm sure he too had his method and he too had his way to counter all that.
Yeah, and this particular Sehwag innings, I have very, very, clear memories of this innings. And then the piece also helped me sort of revisit my own images. What struck me was I distinctly remember he was always clearing his left leg and trying to play a lot of one on the onside. But he was not very tight, When he was playing a defense or on the offside, he was very tight. But on the onside, perhaps because of the field setting, perhaps because he felt a lot safer, he wasn't as tight. He was a lot more liberated to play on the onside. And subsequently, you remember this Dravid letter to Kevin Peterson on playing spin, right? Where Dravid explains why hitting against the spin is safer than playing with spin, which is counterintuitive for most people. So when I first read it, I mean, two players came to mind. One, Azharuddin, of course, and two, this particular innings of Sehwag, where it was quite obvious to me that playing against the spin was safer. And when I say obvious to me, that's how Sehwag made it look. So it is great for me to revisit that innings from the perspective of Sehwag and kind of have the same sort of hypothesis. I mean, or to prove that he had the same view of playing against the spin, and that's why he did what he did. It was an epic innings, and to be honest, I don't want to compare the other 155, but objectively speaking, right, with the quality of bowling attack and the conditions, it's hard to argue that this is inferior to any innings really.
And Sehwag also, the way he talks about the fourth day, basically they came back on the fourth day to start the Indian chase, right? Sehwag and Yuvraj, India were chasing 220, 229, I think, in that test, and they had to play out the last few overs. And he speaks so beautifully about how, in the first innings, how when McGrath started bowling, how he was, slightly outside off, and how he was basically building up towards the spell, and how in the second innings when he started, because there were like very few overs left in the day, how every ball was on the stumps. And he says, that's the difference between having 10 overs in your bank and having 3 overs in your bank, when you want every ball to count. And so you automatically know that they're going to be bowling on the stumps. And so you change you play according to that. And you don't you start anticipating that it's going to be on the stumps. And if it's off the stumps, it's like a defeat for the bowler. But, you make sure that you're covering. So, small things like that and the phases of play and what people are thinking. And of course, the fourth day, I think it's one of the most sensational ways to end the day, right? Like he just hits that 4 of McGrath, doesn't turn around. Like he just basically, he just walks off like completely
like a mic drop moment.
Mic drop.
Yeah, mic drop moment.
That's
exactly.
the mic drop moment. And I'm like, and then Dean Jones on commentary also, who notices that, and he goes goes ballistic. He's like, oh, he wants to win this tomorrow and all. Like Dean Jones is like so pumped up and all that. But that was some moment, and what an anticlimax the next day when it just rains and ruins it. I mean,
no, that moment was also made a lot better, particularly for people in the ground. Is that it was quite frustrating to watch Damien Martyn and Gillespie play for so long. I mean, Gillespie played for so long. My God, it felt like an eternity, right? And, one of my friends didn't want to watch. He went out, he asked all of us to come out. this is the same guy who pulled us out of the 2001 winning moments. I said, dude, no, your track record is bad. You get lost. I'm going to stay back. He went out, ate samosa, drank tea, whatever. And then eventually came back. Every time he'll come back and go out. And so for us, it was quite frustrating. I mean, and Martyn was batting beautifully. There's no doubt about it. But the fact that, Gillespie was holding on for so long was so frustrating. And I had this chart against Peter Roebuck as well, right? I have to say something to Peter Roebuck. I'm like, this is happening. And finally, after all that frustration, they get out and then Sehwag comes and does this. I'm like, wow. And especially, he scored 3 boundaries. If the order of the boundaries were different, the impact would have been different. But the final boundary was this clinching straight drive, and it came right to our stand. Like, wow. And I didn't feel like I even was tempted to sort of bunk office the next day and see what my boss will do. It just was such a great setup. It was one of the great anticlimaxes of Test cricket.
Eventually. What a test it could have been, right? That's just like, it could have been it could have even been a tie. That's I guess it couldn't have been a tie. 220 they would have got there at some point if they were going for it. But yeah, it could have been like a 1-run defeat, or it could have been a 1-wicket victory, or so tantalizing. It was perfectly set up.
And also you had this sense that the game basically rested on Sehwag, because from what we had seen in Bangalore, Lakshman and Dravid were not looking too fluent. Ganguly was not doing much as a batsman at that stage. So you got the sense that it depended very much on what kind of a start Sehwag gave you the next day. Of course, it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing, talking about other batsmen, one of the things that I found very strange about Dravid in this series was the number of times he was getting bowled. And, not just played on, even like straight balls he was missing, right? Which was, he came into the series on the back of reasonably rich form, right? He played well in Australia. He played well in Pakistan. And so I was a bit surprised about how bad a series Dravid had. He scored 150, but just the manner of his dismissals was a bit surprising for me.
He was striking. I think he was not even striking at 30 in this series. That's how well they bowled to him. They gave him absolutely nothing. He had no escape at all. It was absolutely brilliant bowling. He couldn't. I don't remember him playing a drive throughout that series. They gave him nothing.
And also on the odd occasion that they gave something, they had the outfield. So he got a single for a half volley, right?
Yeah, I think the only innings of Dravid that I even vaguely remember from that series is that little cameo that he played on the first innings in Mumbai, which actually helped India go past 100. Otherwise India were probably going to get bowled out for, let me say it, 81 or something that day. So yeah, that was like the only sort of, and that too, that was not even a 50.
But he played well in that innings, actually.
He did. But I really don't have a memory of Dravid from that series at all. I have memory of Sachin and Lakshman in Mumbai. I have memory of Irfan Pathan, Parthiv Patel, many other, Mohammad Kaif. I think Chennai, Mohammad Kaif had a
Kaif batted beautifully in
Kaif batted well.
In fact, he had cramps, right? Because of the heat and dehydration. He had cramps and eventually gets run out. But he batted quite beautifully there, and also he batted well in the next stretch in Nagpur.
No, Parthiv also batted well in Chennai.
Parthiv and Kaif had a partnership. After this, after the Sehwag bit. And but again, in the second innings, we should talk about Kumble again. Again he gets 6 wickets. 13 wickets in the match, man. Brilliant again throughout. And Damien Martyn, apart from Damien Martyn, everyone else. Gillespie, of course, can be the obdurate, frustrating night watchman who has a double century to his name, of course. But other than that, even the rest of the batsmen were not up to the mark against Kumble again.
And even Gilchrist, who had like such a stellar start in the first test, struggled against Kumble in this test. He gets them out one, like the classic Kumble dismissal. He doesn't have enough time to poke in off the front foot. And he gets a bolt around his legs in the second innings. He looked pretty clueless against Kumble in the test. So moving on from the great anticlimax of Chennai to the great political circus of Nagpur. Now, Sibi, please. At least we have excuse of being fans. You were a journalist at that time. Come on, give us the inside scoop. What was happening?
I didn't cover that test. I told you.
But still, you would have had colleagues covering. You would have had like Cricinfo office chatting about it, which with a little more information than us.
No. The thing is that Nagpur pitch was, after the Chennai test finished, the only thing people were talking about was the Nagpur pitch. And actually speaking, the Nagpur pitch, I think in that Ranji games that had happened in that particular pitch was a very sprint-friendly track. So it was assumed that, okay, we're going to get the typical Nagpur pitch, right? As it was back then, like the turner that used to happen, and everyone. Then they go there and they find there's like green and there's grass on the pitch, and it's like completely anti Nagpur. And then all that Ganguly kept saying was, I've told him to shave the grass of the pitch. I've told him to shave the grass of the pitch. And, it has to suit our strengths. It has to suit our strengths. That's all. That's pretty much what happened. And then everyone is like, yeah, obviously, who's mad enough to have so much grass on the Nagpur pitch? And as if Nagpur can suddenly become GABA and all that. I mean, in our heads, right? I mean, that's what we're thinking. I mean, you remember the tests that we used to see in Nagpur back then? Yeah. When Jimmy Adams and all those guys generally plodding their way to thing, and the Indian spinners generally winning the matches almost always. So then, the next thing in the morning of the test, Ganguly has backed out, and then conspiracy is rife. Like, what the hell happened to this guy? And obviously, you hear a lot of stuff too, but how much of it do I want to say in public, and how much I don't want to say is all fine. But the one thing that is well known and is not a secret at all is that there were members of the team who felt that this was a fake. And that was the big problem, because the moment you have your own teammates doubting you, then you're in trouble, right? I mean, either they think you're genuine, or they think, you lose their trust. And Andrew Lepus went to the extent, and he said it's a very complicated injury. Andrew Lepus was the physio of the team. What is this complicated injury, man? I mean, there is injury and there is no injury. There is no complicated injury and all over here.
There's serious or there's not serious, but complicated.
Exactly, right? What is this complicated? And then he says, it is up to the player to decide and all. Basically, I don't think the matters were in his control either. But of course, yeah, I mean,
did Dravid actually say, I don't know in the toss?
I think he might have. I haven't gone back to the toss though.
Okay.
But he might have. But and again, another thing which is not a secret at all is that Dravid and Ganguly, I think, played a big role in the phase between when Ganguly took over as captain and then, because Dravid as vice captain played a huge role in helping the team and shaping the team, and they also had a certain thing going with them, irrespective of all the differences. But I think that particular moment really fractured the bond quite a bit. And that was pretty apparent after that. And I don't know if it ever recovered and all that. I don't know how it is now. But at that time, there was definitely a fracture of a bond between Dravid and Ganguly over that.
So the interesting thing is in John Wright's book, right?
I wanted to read that, but I don't have it here. Good, you read it.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So he talks about how, like you said, they land up there and they find this green pitch. And then he says, basically, the groundsman ghosts him. The curator basically ghosts him. He says, I couldn't even talk to him for 3 days. Like 3 days, he's gone off somewhere. He's not even... It's like no one from the ground staff is even available. No one from the ground staff is even talking to us. And then finally, on the morning of the match, the pitch is still green.
Anyway, the bottom line is this was like basically Dalmia versus Shashank Manohar political battles going on. And this was a way of Shashank Manohar getting back at Dalmia, and Dalmia / Ganguly, who were of course the same camp. And this was a way of him saying that whatever, if I want to teach you a lesson, I can prepare such a pitch even in such an important match and all that. This is all, of course, the political conspiracies that were going on at the time. And I mean, again, I don't know how much of it is exactly verifiable or not, but okay, this is what 90% of the people were talking about.
Also,
why did Ganguly not go on to play Bombay if it was such a weird, complicated injury, to establish the point that it was indeed complicated?
I guess you can't just miss one test with a complicated injury, right? You have to miss two.
Okay, on an average, he missed a seaming pitch and a square turner, so he was okay, I think, on an average. That didn't strike me then, but today I was thinking, why was Dravid the captain in Bombay? Ganguly didn't play. Was he?
And not only did Ganguly didn't play in Nagpur,
Harbhajan
by the way,
didn't play.
Harbhajan also had stomach food poisoning or something on the day before the match, and he didn't play. So again, there was
it was a serious injury.
No, there was further complicated thing because Harbhajan was Ganguly's guy, right? So the conspiracy was, did he force him also to not play? So, was this supposed to be like the shirt waving at Lords, where he's supposed to have told the whole team to take off their shirts and wave it?
This is like Gavaskar asking Chetan Chauhan to walk with him, right? Come, both of us sit.
Exactly. So there was a conspiracy that he had asked him to also not play. But I don't know, again, how much of it to believe and how much not to. But all this was going on at that time. And see, back then also, it's not like, things, it was easy to talk to the players at that time. A lot of, if you called up a player at that time, I mean, as a journalist, if you called up a player at that time, they would talk to you. I mean, they would say, don't mention my name and all, but they would give you. So the thing is, you had a lot of theories from various players that you could draw on. Now, each one of us was, of course, the individual player's perspective. So how much of it was the full story, you don't know. But I don't think journalists today have that luxury of calling, 8 players and asking them their view of what is happening in the Indian team, which we had back then.
No, also, I think there is a lot less, state associations now are a lot less autonomous when it comes to things like preparing a pitch and, pitch curation, I think, has got a lot more central oversight now. So I don't think this could ever happen again. I mean, this kind of one state association going rogue and doing stuff like this, I don't think could happen again.
And if they do, they'll be banned forever. Because there is also the fear, right? Like of the BCCI controlling pretty much what, and they'll be banned, and there'll be a lot of issues there. So they'll play it safe.
With state association going rogue is fine, but one of the things that I want to kind of cross check with you guys is, see, Murali Karthik played that test and he bowled quite well. In fact, I don't remember Murali Karthik turning the ball as much as he did in that test in most of the tests. It also turned. It's not like, okay, sure, it had a fair bit of grass covering, but it also turned. So, and the other thing that I remember about this match is that one, with all these things going on, but it was also the return of Sachin back into the team. I was so naive. Now when I think about it, it's so stupid. The guy is coming back from an injury, from a serious injury. He's not going to come back and score 100 in the first match that he's going to come back into, even like on a fairly flat pitch. And then you have a pitch like this, and then you have all the other context. I was so deeply disappointed with Sachin for failing in both the innings. Now it seems so funny when I look back at it.
So actually, the interesting thing about this game for me was that it was a green track, right? And the Indian fast bowlers had first use of it, right? And they're going at 3.5 and 4 runs an over, and they're giving that they did take wickets, but just the degree of control, right? That McGrath and Gillespie shot. I mean, McGrath bowled 25 overs for 27 runs. It's mind-boggling. And Gillespie, I think he gave a couple of boundaries in his first over, but thereafter he was absolutely miserly, and they were bowling second, right? So if at all, it would have been easier for India to bat, even if it was a seaming wicket or whatever.
Yeah, that's true. I think the rest of the context is just gone for a toss. We just remember that this as one state association going rogue and teaching a lesson, and Ganguly backing out, and they're losing. Right? It's like a 3-part story. There's nothing more to it. It's not like India could have played better. like,
No,
there's
and
always a question.
Australia scored 398 in the first innings
Yeah.
and 329 for 5 declared in the second innings.
Correct.
So there was runs to be made.
Exactly. Like if you
So-
blank out the name of the stadium, right? This could have been a test played in Australia because
Oh yeah.
it looked exactly like that. It felt exactly like that. That there is help and assistance, but Michael Slater is thrashing you, and
Like a GABA test.
It is like a GABA
typical
test.
GABA
Yeah.
test.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where a visiting team would go and Australia would score 400 in the first innings, and then you wouldn't have a chance against McGrath and
Yeah.
Gillespie, pretty much. Yeah, but yeah, that McGrath spell is frightening. I mean, there are 13 maidens in there. I just saw, and I remember watching that game, and there's like a sense of suffocation for the that he could bring on to the batting lineup. And that spreads to the spectator as well, because after a point, there's like nothing happening. There's no runs coming. Every over has like one or two close shouts or one
Correct.
or two played and misses.
Correct.
And you're like, this is done. Anytime he's going to get a wicket now.
Correct. And it's not like boring maiden overs, right? I mean, he's examining the defense of the batsman intensely, every ball almost. Like you can't just aram se leave him outside the off stump. It's not that kind of a spell at all.
No, not at all. In fact, I was watching some of the highlights of the Mumbai test where McGrath's bowling, and I'm like, man, with DRS, this guy would have got like 25% more wickets, man. Like, his wicket tally would have been like so much higher, because how many close calls he's not getting, because either the batsman is playing front or, it's out just like some 1 centimeter outside the line or something like that. And that is for non-shot, like not offering a shot. So it doesn't matter, right? Technically, if you're outside the line or not. So you would have got like 200 more wickets with the DRS, I guess.
Yeah, and McGrath always bowled well in India. Even in 2001, he bowled well. And even though he doesn't have like the big five wicket hauls to show for, but he always had so much control, and he took a bag full of wickets, even if they were like 3 and 4 wicket hauls.
Yeah. But this was, I think this was his peak. I mean, irrespective of what he did in, series in Australia and series in England or whatever, I think, this particular series, the way he bowled throughout and the fact that they won the series, I think it's not often, the first thing that you remember when you say Glenn McGrath, but yeah, he was just stunning in the series.
It's also like the sort of anti-Irfan Pathan in that sense. He's not a YouTube friendly bowler. You look at what he's doing, it doesn't look that dramatic. The ball is not deviating that much. He's basically bowling 45 variations of the same ball. But, just the fact that he could build those kind of groupings and basically build up that kind of a spell, given that bowlers at that time did not have the kind of tactical inputs that bowlers today have, that they maybe did not have the access to that kind of information. The fact that he's able to quickly figure out what his lengths should be and where he should group his deliveries in a spell, and to figure it out so fast without an error is actually amazing. I mean, absolute giant of the game.
He bowled Indian lengths, right? I mean, that itself is a big transformation. To get so many LBWs or so many close LBWs and bolts on Indian wicket for a foreign bowler, and then he doesn't bowl as full as Gillespie does. So he still had the McGrath length, but it was still hitting the stumps.
Yeah, I mean, he bowled the Shami length.
Yeah, the Shami length. Yeah, exactly was what I was thinking of. Like, yeah.
No, so actually, even I was thinking exact same thing. I mean, when I think of, McGrath and Gillespie bowling there, I'm thinking that if India played the attack they have now back then we would have had a real contest. I mean, that would have been really fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, Umesh and Shami on those kind of pitches would have been amazing to watch. I mean, that was the other thing, right? Wicket. That was the other thing. See, Zahir bowled well in most of the series, but other than that, India didn't have. I mean, Agarkar played, I think, a couple of the tests, and
Agarkar played this game.
Exactly. But they didn't have any, the quality that of an Umesh or a Shami or definitely not a Bumrah. at that time. So that was the big problem, right?
So Zahir in this series was averaging like 36 or something. Zahir's new ball partner was averaging 110.
Who? Which was Agarkar? Who was it? Who else?
Agarkar and my friend Irfan Pathan.
And Irfan, your friend Irfan Pathan.
Yeah.
Correct. Oh, yeah. Yeah, see, that's the thing. So when you don't have that, then, but I mean, this Indian team can win test matches on those Nagpur pitches 9 times out of 10. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's Australia or South Africa at the other end. They will win because they have the bowling, fast bowling to do it. But that team didn't.
That's true. Sorry, going back to this Nagpur test, Sri and Prashant, how was your reaction to Australia winning the series? Was there a sense of anticlimax because of the pitch, because of all the politics? Did it feel like the final conquering of the last frontier that Steve Waugh famously marked it as?
No. So there are two parts to this. I felt extremely happy for them, if I'm being honest. Of course, I was very thrilled when India won in 2001 and all that. But, just the sight of, McGrath and Gillespie, with their hands on their knees at the end of it, after seeing that kind of an effort from them, to come so close and to end up on the losing side, it just felt really nice that they basically did the same thing and ended up winners this time and deserved winners and winners by some distance. So I honestly felt very, very happy for them.
I mean, I wasn't covering that series, so I was watching it on TV. I mean, not the series, the test. I was watching it on TV, and for me, it was a bit of an anticlimax because I thought that it would have been fun to have a really close match and Australia winning it and then winning the series. See, Chennai was close, and Chennai could have gone either way on the final day. So I thought if Nagpur had been close, and then on the final day, Australia ends up winning it, that's great, and then they make their history. But to see such an overwhelming defeat, I think that was India's biggest defeat in terms of the margin of runs or whatever. To see such a big defeat and to see such a non-contest was a bit anticlimactic. I mean, of course, it was great, and I was a big fan of Adam Gilchrist. At that time, I mean, he was one of my favorite players. To actually have him captain the side to a series victory was a huge deal, and I was really thrilled for him for that, and it was great. And in fact, there was recently I was listening to a Justin Langer podcast with Gideon Hay and Peter Lawler, and where he's talking about how Matthew Hayden, used to take this big stove along with him on tours, and he used to take all these, stuff for him to cook. And he said, we were playing a test match in one of the worst places in the world, Nagpur. I don't know why he said that. Quite typical, I guess. And he says, Hayden apparently at the end of each day's play in that test, they used to all go to his room and he used to cook them a nice meal in the store. And then they used to have, they anyway used to carry their beers and all that. So they never went out much in Nagpur at all. But they were all mainly in the room and all that. And then they ended up winning the series. So he's like, yeah, it was like such a historic moment for us in such a terrible place or something like that, he said. I mean, I guess he said it partly in jest, but yeah, it was
There's
for
an
me.
There's an obvious answer to why he said that.
Why?
Elite honesty.
Elite honesty. Yeah. Elite honesty.
He can't help himself. He's so honest. Even when he knows it's politically incorrect, he's got to say it. So elite.
The irony is that the first test of this forthcoming series is in Nagpur again, and it'll be interesting.
The worst place on earth.
No, but exactly, not a single Australian today, in today's context, not a single Australian is going to say anything bad about Nagpur or the ground or anything, right? I mean, at the most, there may be a bit of a cribbing about the pitch if it's extremely turning track or something. But other than that, how many people will? I mean, your IPL contract is at stake, boss. Correct. You're not going to say such things.
No, forget that. They're just a lot more politically correct. Like they just don't think that speaking your mind. First of all, they don't think like that. And two, even if they do, they don't speak like this. And even if they do, they don't take pride in it. This is a different stock altogether.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because the Australian team, which is going to tour now, I actually think has a great chance of winning in India. And they've got just the right quality and the caliber of personnel to because so I have this theory that teams that do well in India are teams with good fast bowling. Actually, if you look at it, even right back to Bill Lawry's team, they had Graham McKenzie who did well. Of course, West Indies came with great fast bowling. When Australia won here, they won here with good fast bowling. South Africa won a series here. They had Donald and Pollock bowling really well.
Nanty Hayward.
Yeah, Natty Hayward also. And even when England did well, even though they had Swan and Monty, Jimmy Anderson was actually sort of the unsung hero in that series. He bowled really, really well, bowled dry spells, was able to reverse the ball. So I think teams that do well in India are teams that have good fast bowling, and I think Australia have some of the best in the world right now. So I think they have a great shot.
I mean, it also depends on the pitches they get, right? I mean, if the thing is that in all the series that you mentioned, there was always some pitches that would give their fast bowlers a bit of a whiff. But if India if you neutralize that with the pitches, then maybe then you're dependent on spinners, and Australia may not be that great on that front, at least comparatively.
They just won in Pakistan where the pitches were like
they neutralized everyone.
Yeah, they neutralized Rambo also. I mean,
well, they did win in Pakistan. I mean, I don't know how much those pitches really say much, but in Sri Lanka, it was interesting how they won the first test by a huge margin. Comfortably, they won the first test, but then they lost the second test. That was Prabhat Jayasurya's great arrival, and I think that the pitches that India would like to prepare would be similar to the ones Sri Lanka had for the second test, and where you would want to neutralize their fast bowling attack completely.
Okay, we're not done with the 2004 series yet. We still have one more test to talk about, which is the Bombay test.
And, the greatest test of that series.
The greatest test of that series, of course, because India won. So as usual, the reactions were wild. The reactions to the pitch. I was like, first of all, I'm always in favor of outlier pitches, so long as they're outliers, not every other match. But once in a while, if you have a match which finishes in 2 days, it's perfectly fine. Test cricket will not die. Some batsmen's records will be probably affected, but that's about it really. And also like Siddhi mentioned, McGrath bowled well in this wicket. It's not like fast bowlers are completely neutralizing. Just the spinners did well. And to the extent that Dravid batted and Sachin and Lakshman were batting, they actually batted pretty well. They batted quite beautifully. In fact, the Sachin Lakshman partnership was fantastic to watch. And also Michael Clarke. I mean, perhaps it's worth talking about Michael Clarke because he's also the kind of bowler who's got the action and the pace to do pretty well in India, right? Of course, not like 6 for 9 or whatever figures that he ended up with, but it's not like it's not like a random stranger bowling. He was a pretty accomplished part-time spinner.
Yeah, and Michael Clarke took all those wickets in that 2008 Sydney test also, no? Towards the end of that test to win them the match. So it wasn't a flash in the pan. He's when the pitch suited him, especially the second innings on a wearing wicket, he could put it there. And, he's like poor man's Jadeja, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think also, maybe the reason he didn't bowl more was because he had back injuries and stuff like that going forward, and he wanted to focus on prolonging his batting, obviously. But I mean, he's definitely more than just a part-timer. I mean, he was able to get a good amount of zip. Interestingly, I thought he actually used the conditions better than Horrocks. I thought Horrocks was a little too slow on that pitch. He was like a typical sort of overspinning, loopy, non-subcontinent spinner. Sort of like an off-spinning version of Tufnell. So he's bowling a little too slow. I thought this guy got the pace absolutely right. And the same adjustment even Karthik made, Murali Karthik. I thought he bowled brilliantly in this game. Absolutely superb.
Yeah, Murali Karthik is peculiar. I remember, when he used to talk about cricket at that time, he always feared bowling on a square turner because he felt like the pressure on him is simply too much. And you don't have to try too much. You just have to bowl like fast and straight most of the times to exploit the conditions, which he didn't like doing. So for him, it was like, it was not easy. In fact, he says that, I prefer bowling in Nagpur than Mumbai, even though I did perform better in Mumbai.
No, and that's the other thing, right? I mean, when you talk about these outlier pitches, the nuance goes completely out of the window. Like, oh, okay, this is like a pitch that's spun from the beginning, and 18 wickets fell on one day, 20 wickets fell, whatever. I think there was like out of the 40 wickets, 18 wickets fell on day two, and 20 wickets fell on day three, and the match was done. So, and the first day was very curtailed. So you just had those 2 wickets. The thing is, all the nuance goes out of the window. You're like, you don't really look at which length you had to bowl on this pitch, what speed you had to bowl, which spinners really were better equipped to handle this kind of conditions. Because not all spinners got the same results. I mean, Murali Karthik got wickets, but Nathan Horwitz didn't. Kumble got wickets in the first innings, but Dravid preferred to go with Murali Karthik to start with rather than Kumble in the second. Then Harbhajan also played this test. India played like all three spinners in this test, and he wasn't as successful. So, there is a lot of stuff even on a spinning wicket, you need the right people to use it in the right way and to exploit it in the way. It's not just like you turn up and you get wickets, and that sort of gets totally lost. And this happens both in even like recently South Africa and Australia played a test at the Gabba that finished in like basically 2 days, and fast bowlers ended up taking a lot of wickets. That happens even there. So you don't really analyze after that. Once you say, okay, it's a bad pitch, that's it. The matter is closed. Then it's like a substandard pitch, bad pitch. Whether if this match had happened in India, would you say the same thing? And all this whataboutery and all come, but nobody analyzes these matches when it's branded as bad pitch matches.
And Ponting was quite, quite emphatic in describing it as a not a test quality pitch.
Substandard pitch or something. Yeah.
I mean, if you are the captain of the team and your part-time captain has just like won the series for you, and the first match you come back, you couldn't chase, 100 odd runs, right? 107 runs. You score 93 runs. You got to look at the mirror also, right? Like, I mean, 107 runs, sure, square turner, fine, but 107 runs was not unchaseable.
So, I mean, also, I felt a little bad that Warne missed this game. I mean, this was like the sort of halwa for him at the end, he's played so many games where he's played with injury, he's played against great batsmen, he's played with very little support at the other end. Finally, at the end of all his struggles in India, he gets one halwa pitch and then he breaks his thumb before the game. I think he would have easily taken, Nathan Horwitz himself took 5. I think Warne would have ended up with maybe even 10 wickets in this game. Would have ended the series with 24 wickets.
But you never know, because, it was probably not the kind of pitch that where he would have, because given the pace at which he bowled and given the, lengths, because, it needed Murali Karthik kind of a Murali Karthik kind of bowler to sort of do well on that pitch. Maybe I'm saying.
No, true, but I'm going by the logic that he was good enough to figure that out and adjust his pace and adjust his trajectory. But I just felt bad, that this is like one nice desert at the end of a horrible long journey for him, and he's never going to come to India again, and he missed out.
It could have been like he could have taken like 15 wickets maybe in the test, gone to the post-match press conference and said, for Pugnis, for Sidhu, for Azhar, for Sachin, for Lakshman. Yeah. You guys took one hell of a beating. Anyway, so yeah, Nathan Horwitz also got a wicket in his first over, which is something that's still stuck in my head, because again, it's one of those trivia like factoids, right, that come up. But yeah, we must talk about that Lakshman Sachin partnership. I mean, there was something about that, the manner in which, I mean, I think, if I remember right, I remember watching that partnership, and there was this moment when Sachin comes down the track to Horitz and hits him over his head for six, right? And I'm thinking, I don't remember the last time in the last like 3 years or so that I've seen Sachin come down the track to a spinner. I mean, there was this whole phase, right, when I think this Ashley Giles messed him up completely in the 2001 series, bowling over the wicket on his pads. And after that, he rarely came down the track to spinners because he got stumped in that series. And then he was playing them from the crease all the time. And you used to like almost wish, where is that Sachin who, used to just hammer spinners? And finally, when it happened in Mumbai, I was like, I just felt one sense of liberation. I'm like, wow, finally, he's back.
Yeah, that's exactly the same feeling I had. I mean, I don't know. For some reason, I also associate Sachin not coming down the wicket with this incident against Muralidharan, where he goes down the track to hit him for a six, and then he holds his back. I think he had some injury, and Tony Greig is literally weeping on like satellite television, saying, "Oh, what if this is the end of Sachin? Are we seeing like he just like was holding his back, dude? It's okay. He would get injured, come back. It's okay." But for some reason, I always thought after that he stopped, or he reduced the frequency with which he was coming down the wicket. Or of course, a couple of dismisses, particularly to Ashley Giles, certainly had an impact, and it was very, very liberating. In fact, that sense of Sachin not coming down the wicket was so deeply ingrained in my mind. Even after multiple sort of evidence of all this, there was a test in the Dhoni double-hundred test in Chennai, 2013, I think. There was this final test in Chennai, right? And second innings, India was scoring, like India had a small score to chase.
He finishes off the game in 2 sixes.
With 2 sixes, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Like even then, when that happened, I was thinking about this Nathan Horrocks six. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm sure he did this plenty of times, but the narrative was stuck in your mind that Sachin was not coming down the wicket, and then this happened. So mentally, I went back to this shot when that happened.
And it was like a 90-run partnership or something. I mean, it wasn't. When you think of a partnership in Test cricket, you're usually thinking of like a 150, 200-run partnership, both batsmen getting things. But this was like a 90-run partnership. But given the game, I mean, 90 runs was like so vital in a game like this, right? Because you're basically like playing 200, 100, 200,
and
200.
That's the difference between win and an innings defeat in this case.
In this case. And that 90 runs, I mean, somehow that partnership and the way they handle the spin, I mean, it's like on that pitch, to play like that against, even you can say Nathan Horrocks, you can say, me, bowling, whatever. But to actually bat like that on that pitch shows you, like, it stays in the mind for a long time. And Lakshman, probably that was his best innings of that series. I mean, he had a really bad series.
For sure, yeah, for sure.
I mean, compared to 2001 and 2003-4, I mean, when India went to Australia, this was a terrible series for him.
Yeah.
But then the Mumbai test, he finally played that knock.
Yeah. And also, I mean, just some context on this whole, substandard and all that. I mean, they played, they put on 90 runs, but they also, like Tendulkar, I think, batted about 80, 90 balls. And Lakshman batted maybe 80, 90 balls. So if these two guys could play 180 balls between them, it can't be that substandard where it's a total lottery. I'm sure there was skill involved, for sure. A considerable amount of it, because they were not just playing shots. I mean, it's not like they were just chancing their arm. They were also trusting their defense on a surface where, the ball was doing funny things.
We have covered quite a lot of ground. I just want to ask this final question before we wrap it up. Now that you had the opportunity to revisit this, what is the one thing that you felt like, oh my God, I was like, I had the completely wrong understanding of this when I was watching it at that time. Like, what is the retrospective wisdom that that is obvious to you when you revisit it now?
I mean, for me, I think I mentioned it also. It was Nagpur. I mean, I really thought it was like a completely unplayable surface, and where, green top, where, it's not the case. I mean, it was a green wicket for sure, but it was exceptional bowling from Australia, and there were runs to be made. They made a lot of runs, and it wasn't I wouldn't even call it an outlier pitch by any means. It was just, it suited them. It suited their strengths. India didn't have the fast bowling at that time. And they ended up having a big victory. But yeah, in my head, it was always like, oh my God, it was one of those seeming paradises where Australia had all going. It's not true at all.
So, to answer the same question, for me, there were two things which I feel embarrassed actually when I think about now. One was back then, I thought the difference between the two sides was the batting, which is the wrong way to look at it. The difference between the two sides was that they had two fast bowlers, one of whom averaged at 16 and the other of whom averaged at whatever, 25. And here you have one fast bowler who's averaging at 37 and another X who's partnering this fast bowler who's averaging at 110. I mean, that's the difference between the two sides. The second, I mean, again, this is because, you know, at that time, 20 years ago, 19 years ago, you're much less allergic to bullshit than you are now. I mean, you consume it without even knowing it, right? I mean, you actually think that going late to the toss is a legit tactic, you know, at some level, you're incredibly stupid. So, you know, when I look back, this was actually the last series where I used to refer to India as us. You know, it would always be us. How much did we make? How much did they make? You know, that thankfully ended with this series. After this, it was, you know, India won, India lost. So
was it because you were so ashamed that they lost that you said, I don't want to own up to this team, like them?
No, no, but I mean, to be fair, it is not that. It was because at the end of the series, even though India had lost, I felt genuinely happy for Australia. Like I'm glad they won, and I was glad that Steve Waugh was not the captain when they won.
On that, I completely agree.
Yeah, I was also glad Ponting was not captain in that moment they won, because I was a big, as I said, big Gilchrist fan, and it was amazing to have him having that moment of glory. Because remember, he had captained in that game at Headingley where Mark Butcher had gone and beaten Australia in that Ashes test. So that was a big bummer for me. I'm like, oh, come on, man. I mean, he's captaining and this has happened to him. But yeah, so that was a
Steve Waugh was so offended by it that he thought he could play with one leg and still win a match over Gilchrist captaining. That's how self-absorbed he was. And people celebrated. Like, hang on. Wasn't that a judgment? Are you throwing shade at Gilchrist? Anyway.
I think that's for another rewind pod.
Yeah, we'll get there. No, I was about to make a difference. You being happy that Ponting was not there is because you like Gilchrist more. But us being happy that Steve Waugh was not there had nothing to do with Gilchrist.
Okay.
So ironically, we are basically we're basically dumping on two people who are held up as icons of captaincy, you know, Ganguly and Steve Waugh.
I know.
Yeah, both of whom have received the Ian Chappell treatment anyway.
Correct.
Okay, so that was fun. I think we covered quite a bit of ground, and it was very. I had fond memories of that series, so it was great for me to personally revisit that. And thanks a lot, Prashant, for joining us, and thanks always, as always, Sidvi, for joining this time on the other side of the table.
Thanks so much, guys. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And it goes back into showing why you should always have a 5-test series, because never know what could have happened in that 5th test. It could have been 2-2 at the end of it. Anyway.
That's your favorite scoreline anyway. So every time we have a prediction thing, Sidvi always goes for a safe 2-2, even if it's a
this series, time also 2-2.
He says 2-2.
2-2.
And you, Mahesh, what's your call?
No call. We do another preview for this, so I will wait till that time.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for listening. I know you've been supporting us by listening to our podcasts and talking about it in social media platforms, and also buying our books, War Minus the Shooting and Cricket Beyond the Bazaar so far. We also have one more in the pipeline, which we are very excited to present to you soon. More on that in due course of time. Thanks for all your support. Thank you.
India have won the series. They're going to get